this is where it was at. It's special when a night like Thelonius would come up and then have the piano there for the play. The piano was tuned and everything was top notch, where the music would come out and be like it was supposed to be. And the man was very artistic and very particular about everything that he liked and playing the music and whatnot, and the people that came there to listen to it.
You talking about Monk?
I'm talking about Monk now.
Tell me when you first met Monk.
I met Monk in the early part of 41. 118th Street between 7th and St. Nicholas Avenue, on your left-hand side, Men's Playhouse.
His melodies were beautiful. His chords were unusual. His colors, his rhythmic sense, you know, and the spiritual feeling in the music. You know, when you heard his music, it just carried you away.
The most difficult thing about Monk in the studio was a combination of his perfectionism and his really basic, I think, inability to understand what the hell was supposed to be so difficult about his music. You know, the attitude that he understood it, why couldn't you?
A lot of things that we do in common one to another. And we all do some of the usual things, you know. We use some of the usual phrases. Monk wasn't like that, you know. So Monk was like a real free spirit who said, I'm gonna play this way. This is what I want. And he played stuff that nobody else ever played. He was a rebellious spirit, and probably one of the few people who really stuck to their gun and got what he wanted out of what he wanted to do. You know, there's very few people who make it doing what they want to do. Monk went through a period of not making it, but he still was Monk. When he made it, he still was Monk.
He epitomizes what a jazz musician is supposed to be. He has a style which is instantly identifiable, whether it's in composition, whether it's in his playing, or whether it's someone playing along the lines of Thelonious Monk. It's a very personal approach to jazz.
Everyone treated Thelonious special. I knew there was something special about this guy because he didn't quite act like all my uncles or his friends, or you know, and everybody felt very happy. He elicited a real good feeling from everybody in the family all the time. And, you know, he was big on, like, anytime anybody in the family had a birthday, Thelonious was there to play Happy Birthday, which is an extraordinary event. To hear him play Happy Birthday, believe me, it was not the traditional voicings. But you know, for a long time, I didn't really know what it was per se. You know, I would listen to him play the piano, and I knew that he didn't play like everybody. In fact, Now, in retrospect, as I get older, I would have to say there was certainly a point when I was very young where I was rather distressed that it didn't seem like Dad was doing what everybody else who was a world famous entertainer was doing. You know, it was like he was into his own thing.
It was a message. He had a way of saying to the piano and giving you a message. You know, every note was clear, precise, at the same time a tremendous sense of swing. And in addition to all of that, he showed me that all the values of our music are modern, like stride piano, for example.
Monk was a stride pianist all of his life, and he would write even a very complicated piece of music, and he would play somewhere along the line stride piano because that was the way he heard things and the way he organized things.
Harlem stride piano was this incredible period around the 20s and 30s, you know, and 40s also, of the great, great pianists such as James P. Johnson, Lucky Roberts, Willie the Lion Smith, and many others. And they would play a lot of rent parties, you know, and the piano became like a total orchestra, and they would play for dancing. And James P. Johnson, ironically, he lived in San Juan Hill in the same area as Monk, you know. And James P. was one of our really master pianists. And they all went into stride, and stride was just a wonderful way for pianists to swing. I like stride.
I think it's easier to understand Thelonius if you realize that in many ways he was himself a tremendously traditional artist. He had a great awareness of the past in jazz. Well, you know, the area that he grew up in the West 60s in New York was an area that James P. Johnson was living in at that time, and apparently James P. was a childhood hero of his. I mean, I recall a recording session when I did the first solo album I did with Monk. We were standing in a control room listening to the playback of an improvised blues that he had done, and he turned around and said to me, "Gee, I sound just like James P. Johnson."
And for me, Thelonius was wonderful because he put the traditional and modern and put it together. So there was no separation, you know. And you wrote a beautiful blues called Functional. I'm going to play this for you and use a little bit of stride.
first moved there was 1922, summer, right? So there were houses on both sides of 63rd Street. In fact, all the way up, like where they have Lincoln Center now, there were houses on both sides of the street all the way up to Central Park West. And most people were from the West Indies, and we were about the only Americans when we first moved over here. And since our name was Monk, they thought we were West Indian too. And then they found out that we weren't, you know.
And his mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and she was very, very close to a number of the ladies in the community, and Thelonious was very, very close to his mother. And although she came from Carolina, I think a lot of her influences in later life, the influences that affected Thelonious, because he came here when he was 3, came from those friends that his mother had, who were from, whose origins were in the various islands in the Caribbean.
Mostly West Indians, you find the children have to play something or do something. So most of them either play the piano or the violin. So in that atmosphere, my mother said I had to take piano, and Thelonious, he didn't want to play the violin, so he had to play the trumpet. So I took piano lessons, he took trumpet lessons. But they found out he used to have bronchial trouble, you know, cold in the chest so much. And the music teacher told my mother that he shouldn't play the trumpet because it was affecting, you know, his blowing. And he got interested in the piano. So my brother would start playing, and he found out he could pick up any tune that came along, you know, without the music. So my mother said that if he was going to play, he should learn how to play the right way. So the teacher who was teaching me, which I didn't like piano lessons, he started teaching my brother in my place, so he took lessons there.
There was a strong tradition of education. There was a strong tradition of religion involved in those things. There was a strong structure for respect and authority for elders and those kind of things, and those values were very, very important to Thelonious, and I think it had an overall influence on the way he went about his job in his music, which was very workmanlike fashion. To Apollo on Wednesdays to amateur night, and he and his 2 friends, a drummer and a trumpet player. But the 3 of them anyway, they would go up and they won every time they went up. So they barred them from coming up there because they were winning each time. They were too good to play, in other words, that's the way people considered it. Then he played other places. They just had gigs where they played different places. And then some preacher woman he went away with, she needed some musicians to go with her, you know, to accompany her when she was doing her healing and preaching.
And she came and asked my mother and the other kids' mother if they could go, because they were underage, so they had to sign for them. And they went away. So she needed these musicians, you know, they bring the people in, they play good music, and people follow music. And so they upped her business, and they were really helped too, because by going away and listening to different music and meeting different people, they became better musicians. And then from there, you know, he got to know people, and then he was going up to mentions. He used to go in there and sit in and play and listen, till they finally had him. He was the piano player up there.
When you came in, the bar was here. It was a fairly big bar, but you could hear the music, which was back here. And it was set up so that you had tables all over the place. So you could eat, you could get sandwiches and stuff as well as drinks. And then as you came back this way, there was a kind of a dance floor, which I guess, if memory serves correctly, must have been about in here somewhere, because the tables were pretty much on the walls, and the bandstand, as I remember, was maybe about that high, maybe, because you had to go up steps to get on the bandstand. And this was the hippest crowd in New York. I mean, these people really listened to the music. You had pimps and hustlers and people in the business, but you also had a lot of just sheer jazz fans. And I mean, these are people that knew that the music that they heard here was more often than not on the cutting edge.
This was the place where Monk, you know, got together. He was playing a lot with Charlie Christian, and this is where they created this music, bebop. How it happened, we never know. It's kind of something that is like a miracle. You have Dizzy and Charlie Parker and Miles, they all get together and create this music called bebop. But Monk, he seemed to have been that central figure.
Chronologically, he existed at the beginning of the modern jazz movement. He was involved with all of the key players in the bebop game, but if you compare him, well, either with the most obvious comparison with Bud Powell, or if you compare him with some of the other young bebop players of the time, maybe somebody like Al Haig or Dodo Marmarosa, Monk was not really on the same wavelength as those people, or putting it another way, they weren't on the same wavelength that he was on.
I go to Thelonius' house, and Bud would come by a lot of times and hang out. But Bud had this awesome technique on the piano. I mean, he just created that whole bebop concept, you know, of piano, which everybody was attempting to play like Bud Powell. You know, those tremendous runs, that tremendous feeling, those huge chords that he would play, the tremendous tempos that he could handle. Thelonius was just like the opposite of that. Thelonius, he could take like one note, you know, and give you a message. He just could take one note. You take an octave and just take an octave. Like Thelonius is a good example of that, you know. And he could do that.
though he was one of the main contributors to the music, he came to the music in the same way that Dizzy, Bird, Kenny Clark, each one was tremendously individualistic. Monk brought these harmonic and kind of rhythmic displacement where you would expect to hear rhythm going one way, he kind of moved it around a little bit. And you hear that in Charlie Parker. You hear that in where Charlie Parker goes over the bar line. You hear that in Dizzy Gillespie with some of his long lines. They loved Monk for that reason. I mean, he stimulated their thinking.
So with Monk, they said bebop. I think Time magazine said bebop and beyond. That's how it describes Monk's music, you know. So bebop was the term that was given this music. Although everybody played a little bit different. You know, Monk played a certain way, Bud Powell played a certain way, Herbie Nichols played a certain way, Miles Davis played a certain way, Fats Navarro played a certain way. But it was called bebop, but in a way, everybody had their own individual expression.
When I came in, I was just enamored with the excitement of being on 52nd Street, you know, with the 20 clubs and history of jazz right there, all in that one block, and all these fabulous musicians with, you know, Art Tatum. I'm working opposite Art Tatum. I'm working with Ben Webster, one of my all-time idols. Right next door is Coleman Hawkins, with Don Baez playing, with Thelonius Monk playing on piano. And so, you know, it's nice to see a familiar face. And so I say, hey, man, it's good to see what you've been into. And he said, well, I haven't been doing too much, but, you know, I've been doing a few things with Hawkins. And so I think they had like 2 or 3 weeks there at the club or something.
I first heard Monk with Coleman Hawkins on 52nd Street, a club I think called the Downbeat Club, you know. And I walked in because Hawk was my idol, you know. So wherever he'd play, I'd always be there. And I always catch musicians I never heard before. Well, my first reaction to Monk, because that night he didn't play much piano, you know. And I couldn't understand what Coleman Hawkins was doing with this piano player, because he was just hitting a couple of notes and just stop and wouldn't play. But something drew me back. I went back again and discovered I was listening to a true genius.
He wasn't like every other piano players. I mean, he didn't do showbiz. He didn't throw his hands up he just played the piano and he did what he did. And if you didn't listen, then you might miss the point of everything. And most of them did. And Coleman Hawkins caught a lot of hell for hiring Monk.
Resistance that he got creatively and artistically came from the media and from the critique side, which has nothing to do with the music. I think he always felt a little bit maligned that he was considered outside of the mainstream, because, I mean, if there was ever a mainstream guy, Thelonius was mainstream. All you have to do is listen to the compositions that he chose to perform, even early in his career. He was picking compositions by Berlin and by Cole Porter and Duke Ellington and those people, you know, and if you listen to his playing stylistically, Art Tatum, Willie the Lion Smith, Duke Ellington, all those people prop up so prominently, and that's why those guys knew exactly who he was and exactly what he was doing. Thelonious was with Bud, and they were on their way out of town, and Bud made a stop, I believe, and was seen by undercover police, and Thelonious took the drugs, whatever it was that Bud had, because Bud had had a lot of trouble. And Thelonious basically took the weight. But it did result in him losing his cabaret card.
When I got to know Monk, when Monk began working with us, it was just simply an established fact that he did not have a cabaret card, and that meant in New York City in those days that you could not work in any club or bar in New York.
I mean, he did come around to jam sessions. He was allowed to sit in. He did a lot of things unofficially, but officially he couldn't work to the extent that he should have been allowed to work. I think that this was a terribly racist thing that took place. It was done deliberately at one point, I feel, because too many black musicians were working downtown.
In the big picture, I don't know if it had as detrimental effect on his career as it had on his basic emotion as a person. I mean, not being allowed to ply your craft, not being allowed to earn a living in your hometown for your wife and your family has got to eat at anyone. But in that period is when Thelonious did a great deal of writing. He was home, my mother was working 2 and 3 jobs, and so consequently, Thelonious was playing Mr. Mom, and he was at the piano. It afforded him an opportunity to really concentrate on his writing.
See, when he signed with Riverside in the mid-50s, he had been recording for about 7 years for both Blue Note and Prestige, and had developed that reputation of being tremendously difficult to listen to, tremendously difficult to understand, and as a result had a very small cult following and no real acceptance as yet in the jazz world. So we began with, I thought it was fairly safe, and it was. I began by suggesting an all Ellington album. Another trio album involving standards, and then I guess we felt that we and the world were ready to tackle Monk playing his own material with horns, and that was the third Riverside album was the Brilliant Corners album with Sonny Rollins, which is the first Monk album for me that made a big splash.
very, very tiny apartment in the beginning, and I know we spent a lot of time in the bed together, all four of us. It was remarkable. I could lay in the bed with my dad until I was about 10 years old. I mean, anytime you might walk in the house and you might find all four of us on the bed playing cards, or because my father and mother were big on games. They liked to play all kinds of card games, you know, all the time. And of course, you know, Thelonius was excellent ping pong player and absolutely extraordinary pool player. So he was big on games. He liked that competitive little thing. But we played games a lot. But it was we were very, very close-knit family. You know, Thelonius took me and my mother and my sister out on the road with him a lot, you know, in the latter years. He really liked that. My mother always. And now when I think about it in retrospect, I know he was going through great changes to make it possible for us to do these things because he wasn't making that much money.
I met Nika in about 1954 or 55, and I've always thought of the Baroness as being possibly the only example in our times of sort of the modern version of the medieval patron of the arts. I mean, I think she was a true patroness and was extremely helpful to quite a number of musicians, of whom, you know, the most notable were Bird and Monk.
All the musicians would always go to her place and whatnot. She'd always be around. I think perhaps that the Baroness realized what a genius this man was, you know, and probably just she had that sense, that timing, to realize that this was a master, and maybe that was the contribution that she was supposed to make. Fire Spot was kind of a unique place. It was just an ordinary bar near 5th Street and 3rd Avenue, and it had an upright piano originally. In fact, the first time they got a grand piano was when Monk came in. And I don't know what it was about this place. It just had a certain kind of spirit. It certainly wasn't the most beautiful club in the world. It was just about as basic a bar as you could find. And it just became the place. And Monk was very popular there.
First time I saw Thelonius was the old 5 Spot. It was the band with John Coltrane, Shadow Wilson, and Wilbur Ware. And I guess this was the most awesome quartet that I'd heard in my life. Going there from 9 to 4 every night that they worked. I was sitting in there or standing outside listening to 4 great musicians. Really fantastic for me.
And Monk's music was such a challenge for John Coltrane. He could take it to another sphere. As you know, Train was incredible. And here the two of them together down the 5 Spot, oh, it was awesome, awesome. Because Monk would just feed you them funny chords, you know, and give you all that space. And Train would fill that space up with all kinds of stuff. So it was a natural marriage between the two. Natural.
Look here. Coltrane practiced Monk tunes. Sonny Rollins practiced Monk tunes, and they practiced these tunes. They practiced playing these songs. You did not you did not necessarily come up and look at some Monk changes and play the song. You know, see, Monk was that kind of way, period, man. I tell you, it's a song Monk played. It's an old standard Monk played called Lulu's Back in Town. You know, gotta get my old tuxedo press. Gotta sew a button on my vest, cause tonight I gotta look my best. Lulu's back in town. Man, let me tell you, I heard Monk practicing that song. He played that tune in tempo and practiced that song for maybe 2 hours. The average pianist, I doubt if there's a pianist. I know myself, if you could sit and play a tune yourself in tempo and do it for an hour, I don't think there are too many cats that can do it. You know, so he was very special that way. The most exciting moment for me with Monk came at the Vanguard. It was one day when he refused to play any of his songs. And so he played all standards. And then, that's when one really knew the truth about Monk then.
What was it?
Ugh. See, it didn't matter what Monk played. I saw Monk sit down at the piano and read a sheet of music, note for note, and that sounded like Monk. You see?
The new Fire Spot on 8th Street is the first chance I got an opportunity to be around him every night. For 6 weeks, I worked opposite him, and I was with 3 different trios. This was about 64. So Thelonius came in the room after the 3rd week he was there. No, the 6th week we were there, the last week. And he looked up at the stage, and I'm working with the new. So he walked over me and said, "Who the hell are you, the house drummer?" And kept going. And that was the first words he had spoken to me for 6 weeks. So that Monday, we closed on Sunday, and that Monday, I got a phone call at about 8 in the morning saying, "We'd like you to come down to Columbia because Mr. Monk is recording, and we'd like you to come down." I hung up. So the phone rang again, and he said, "Oh, this is no joke. We're down here at Columbia Studio waiting for you." So I went down, and there they were. So we did this date, which he never said nothing to me. Again, I walked in, he never said good morning, he said nothing. I put the drums up, and after I got everything set and he saw that I was ready, he started playing. He still hasn't said a word to me. So we finished this whole half an album, and while we listened to the playback, he walks over to me and said, "Would you like some money?" I said, "No, I'll wait for the check." He said, "I don't want anybody in my band being broke." So I said, "In your band?" He said, "Yes, do you have your passport ready?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, we're leaving Friday." And I was in the band.
There are two numbers which I personally call masterpieces. Et ce sont Roundabout Midnight et Crepuscule with Nelly. Nous avons demandé à Monk laquelle de toutes ces compositions il considère la meilleure.
I don't know. I haven't really rated them. I mean, within my mind.
Well, then, which is the one you like best to play?
I like all of them.
Non, il ne sait pas laquelle est la meilleure, et il ne sait pas laquelle il préfère jouer non plus. I mean, they're all good.
Well, I expect them to be a certain standard, unless before I let anybody hear it.
You mean everything you write is stamped with genius?
I don't know about that.
No, because I'm cornering you.
He was very witty and a very sensitive person, and in a way, for me, I believe that's why a lot of times he gave you these different airs and these different little gestures that he would do, because he didn't want you to get close to him because of him being a very sensitive person. He was a very sensitive person.
When I finally discovered Thelonius, I went to his house. After hearing him the second time, I went by and asked him, could I come by to see him? And he said, yes. I went by his house. And I was in his house about 9 hours. I'll never forget this, because he had a picture of Billie Holiday in the ceiling. And he had a red light and a small piano. So, being a young musician, I started to ask him a lot of questions. He didn't answer any question at all. And I must have stayed there about maybe 1 hour asking him questions. He never said anything, you know. I stayed inside that room close to 9 hours, just with him. All of a sudden, it got very quiet, it got very silent. And finally, I said, well, Mr. Monk, thanks very much for inviting me. You know, I think I better leave, right? He said, okay, come by and see me again. And I left, and I was completely perplexed, see. When I went back to see him again a month later, he played the piano almost 2 or 3 hours for me. Then I realized, because I've done a lot of reading of Sufism and mysticism, and I realized in the ancient cultures, a lot of the masters, they communicate without words, you see. And Monk was a master of that. When I hear Monk play, it's like hearing Mahalia Jackson sing. It's like hearing Billie Holiday sing. There's a certain quality when the music just reaches you someplace else. Not just the ears, but it reaches inside the spirit, you know. And that Round Midnight has that kind of quality. Our music is a music of conversation. And for Louis Armstrong, when he played his trumpet, he was talking. He was really speaking. When we hear the blues, it's really a language, a musical language of communication. And Monk was a master of that. So he could make one of those funny runs. He would start up here at the top of the piano, and a half hour later, he would get to the bottom. Now, you try to follow that trip with him going down the keyboard. It's incredible. watched him and saw him and heard him, it was not just the melodies and the notes and the sounds and the colors, but it was a kind of a wonderful commitment, you know, that this is what I'm going to say. This is my music, and I'm going to keep doing that, you know. Not only is Monk such a master pianist and composer, but when you watch him play, he does a complete ballet. He doesn't play the piano, but he puts his whole body into the piano. And when Monk hits something up here, something down there, his whole body, so like it's a whole dance.
Dancing was funny. When this music was happening, then he'd get up and do his little dance because he was feeling good and he knew you knew where you were and the music was swinging and that's what he wanted. So he said, I don't have to play now, you making it happen.
My association with jazz is at dance halls. You know, we gave dances. People danced to the music. When you went to the Bird, you was at a dance. When you went to hear anything, if you went to hear Stan Ken's band, it was at a dance. If you heard Duke Ellington's band, it was at a dance. So that dancing was part of the music. And I think Monk sort of knew this some kind of way, because Monk had his own little shuffle, and he'd get up and dance while Charlie Rouse played. And the minute Charlie Rouse stopped his solo, Monk was at the piano playing. That means instantly, right into it, you know, no pause, no. The dancing was a part of the piano playing. He was way ahead when it came to the difference that distinguishes the Van Gogh from the common, or distinguishes the greats, you know. And Monk was the great, you know. And how he learned it, I can't tell you. I don't know how a person could do it that early. You know, that was a genius. That's all. Genius is funny. You know.
In 1964, when the Time article came out, I think finally he understood that there were a number of people very interested in what he was playing and what he was doing. I think it made him play more because now he knew people were listening to him. So there was a great enthusiasm when we went out to work that he had, because now he knew that he could see in person people standing in line waiting to come in to hear him play. And then we were traveling quite a bit. We went on 2 world tours. And things were really, really looking good. He was a very sensitive, I can say, a very sensitive person, a very knowledgeable person. And I think a lot of things happened to him that he held within. He never would release them. And I think in the end, it finally caught up with him, you know.
Although Monk, he reached a point where he was doing the concerts, he toured, he was very popular, but I just got the impression that the surroundings of the music didn't move with the music, you know. You see what I mean? You had this tremendous music, but they just weren't the places. I felt that somebody like Monk should have had a place to play. It was fabulous. The best piano, the best conditions, best sound, everything, you know. And I felt it wasn't there. And I could be wrong, and I felt spiritually that he just shut the door and said, okay, I've given this much. And he gave a lot, you know. I said, okay, this is for you, you know. I've stopped.
That's all. He just said he didn't feel like playing, so he stopped. You know, if he say something, he just say it, but he don't go into details to tell you why or anything. I guess he didn't know why himself when he didn't feel good. We went over to see him a few times, and he talked, walk around with us. He'd go out and take walks, but he didn't feel like playing or appearing in front of the public. He came out one time, I forgot when that was, in the 70s or something, and played, but then he didn't come back again after that.
I would go back to the fact that the group Sphere that I was involved with, well, our first album was a dedication to Thelonius. And the music that we wanted to play was his music, and we decided that maybe if this album was good enough, it would encourage him to return to playing again. But the day that we went in to record, he passed away that morning while we were in the studio, so he never had a chance to hear the music.
I think Monk was he was a part of a golden era of the music, you know. There was a golden era of the music, and I mean, like all golden eras, they come to an end. And so you have to go through a certain period before there's a renaissance.
He gave so much, and he had to make great sacrifices to give what he gave, because he never compromised his music. You see, some composers, some musicians, they decide, well, okay, I'm gonna do this because this is gonna make me some money, you know. But Monk was almost like a prophet. He was here for a reason. He was here to bring us all this beauty, all this love to the world. And he couldn't compromise. He didn't know how.